Hi students, today we will see class 12 Sociology chapter 6 Community, Nations and Nation States. At the simplest level, a nation is a sort of large-scale community. It is a community of communities. Members of a nation share the desire to be a part of the same political collectivity. This desire for political unity usually expresses itself as the aspiration to form a state. In its most general sense, the term state refers to an abstract entity consisting of a set of political, legal institutions claiming control over a particular geographical territory and the people living in it. In Max Weber's well-known definition, a state is a body that successfully claims a monopoly of legitimate force in a particular territory. In bracket Weber 1970-78. A nation is a peculiar sort of the community that is easy to describe but hard to define. We know and can describe many specific nations founded on the basis of common cultural, historical and political institutions like a shared religion, language, ethnicity, history or regional culture. But it is hard to come up with any defining features, any characteristics that a nation must possess. For every possible criterion, there are exceptions and counter-examples. For example, there are many nations that do not share a single common language, religion, ethnicity and so on. On the other hand, there are many languages, religions or ethnicities that are shared across nations. But this does not lead to the formation of a single unified nation of, say, all English speakers or of all Buddhists. How then can we distinguish a nation from other kinds of communities, such as an ethnic group based on common descent in addition to other commonalities of languages or culture, in bracket a religious community or a regionally defined community? Conceptually, there seems to be no hard distinction any of the other types of community can one day form a nation. Conversely, no particular kind of community can be guaranteed to form a nation. The criterion that comes closest to them distinguishing a nation is the state. Unlike the other kinds of communities mentioned before, nations are communities that have a state of their own. That is why the two are joined with the hyphen to form the term nation state. Generally speaking, in recent times, there has been a one-to-one bond between a nation and a state. In bracket, one nation, one state, one nation. But this is a new development. It was not true in the past that a single state could represent only one nation, or that every nation must have its own state. For example, when it was in existence, the Soviet Union explicitly recognized that the peoples it governed were of different nations and more than 100 such internal nationalities were recognized. Similarly, people constituting a nation may actually be citizens or residents of different states. For example, there are more Jamaicans living outside Jamaica than in Jamaica. That is, the population of non-resident Jamaicans exceeds that of resident Jamaicans. A different example is provided by dual citizenship laws. These laws allow citizens of a particular state to also simultaneously be citizens of another state. Thus, to cite one instance, Jewish Americans may be citizens of Israel as well as the USA. They can be even severe in the armed forces of one country without losing their citizenship in other country. In short, today it is hard to define a nation in any way other than to say that it is a community that has succeeded in acquiring a state of its own. Interestingly, the opposite has also become increasingly true, just as would-be or aspiring nationalities are now more and more likely to work towards forming a state. Existing states are also finding it more and more necessary to claim that they represent a nation. One of the characteristic features of the modern era, in bracket, recall the discussion of modernity from chapter 4 of your class 11 textbook, Understanding Society, is the establishment of democracy and nationalism as the dominant sources of political legitimacy. This means that today the nation is the most accepted or a proper justification for a state, while the people are the ultimate source of legitimacy of the nation. In other words, states need the nation as much or even more than nations need states. But as we have seen in the preceding paragraphs, there is no historically fixed or logically necessary relations between a nation-state and the varied forms of community that it could be based on. This means that there is no predetermined answer to the question, how should the state part of the nation state treat the different kinds of community that make up the nation part? As in shown in the box 6.2, which is based on the United Nations Development Program UNDP report of 2004 on culture and democracy, most states have generally been suspicious of the cultural diversity and have tried to reduce or eliminate it. However, there are many successful examples, including India, which shows that it is perfectly possible to have a strong nation state without having to homogeneous different types of community identifies into one standard type. Here in activity 6.3, is it really true that there is no characteristic that is common to each and every nation? Discuss this in class. Try to make a list of possible criteria or characteristics that could define a nation. For each such criterion, make a list of examples of nations that meet the criterion and also a list of nations that violate it. In case you came up with the criterion, that every nation must possess a criteria in the form of continuous geographical area. Consider the cases mentioned below. In bracket, locate each country or region on a world map. You will also need to do a little bit of period search on each case. Alaska and the United States of America, Pakistan before 1971 in bracket Western Pakistan plus Eastern Pakistan, Malvinas or Falkland Islands and United Kingdom, Austria and Germany, Equator, Colombia and Venezuela, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait and United Arab Emirates. In bracket hint, the first three cases are examples of geographically distant territories belonging to the same nation. The last three cases are the example of the countries with contiguous territory, shared language and culture but separate nation states. Can you add to this list of examples? Here, box 6.2. Threatened by community identity, states try to eliminate cultural diversity. Historically, states have tried to establish and enhance their political legitimacy through the nation-building strategies. They sought to secure the loyalty and the obedience of their citizens through the policies of assimilation or integration. Attaining these objectives was not easy, specifically in a context of cultural diversity where citizens, in addition to their identification with their country, might also feel a strong sense of identity with their community, ethnic, religious, linguistic, and so on. Most states feared that the recognition of such differences would lead to social fragmentation and prevent the creation of a harmonious society. In short, such identity policies were considered a threat to state unity. In addition, accommodating these differences in politically challenging, so many states have resorted to either suppressing these diverse identities or ignoring them on the political domain. Policies of assimilation, often involving outright suppressions of the identities of ethnic, religious or linguistic groups, try to erode the cultural differences between the groups. Policies of integration seek to assert a single national identity by attempting to eliminate ethno-national and cultural differences from the public and political arena, while allowing them in the private domain. Both sets of policies assume a singular national identity. Assimilationist and integrationist strategies try to establish singular national identities through various interventions like 1. Centralizing all power to forums where dominant group constitutes a majority and eliminating the autonomy of local or minority group. Centralizing all power to forums where the dominant group constitutes a majority and eliminating the autonomy of local and minority groups. Second, imposing a unified legal and judicial system based on the dominant group's traditions and abolishing alternative system used by other groups. Third, adopting the dominant group's language as the only official national language and making it use mortuary in all public institutions. Fourth, promotions of the dominantal group's language and culture through national institutions, including state-controlled media and educational institutions. 5. Adoption of the state symbol celebrating the dominantal group's history, heroes and culture reflected in such things as choice of a national holiday or naming of streets, etc. Last one, leisures, seizure of lands, forests and fisheries from minority groups and indigenous people and declaring them national resources. Source adopted from UNDP Human Development Report 2004, Chapter 3, Features 3.1. Box 6.2 speaks of the assimilationist and integrationist policies. Policies that promote assimilation or aimed at persuading and encouraging or forcing all citizens to adopt a uniform set of cultural values and norms. These values and norms are usually entirely or largely those of the dominant social group. Other dominant or subordinated groups in the society are expected or required to give up their own cultural values and adopt the prescribed ones. The policies promoting integration are different in style but not in overall objectives. They insist that the public culture be restricted to a common national pattern, while all non-national cultures are to be relegated to the private sphere. In this case too, there is the danger of the dominant group's culture being treated as the national culture. You can probably see that the problem is by now. There is no necessary relationship between any specific form of the community and the modern forms of the state. Any of the many bases of the community identity like language, religion, ethnicity and so on may or may not lead to the nation formation. There are no guarantees. But because community identities can act as the basis for nation formation, already existing states see all the forms of community identity as the dangerous rebels. That is why states generally tend to favor a single homogeneous national identity in the hope of being able to control and manage it. However, suppressing cultural diversity can be very costly in terms of the alienations of the minorities or subordinated communities whose culture is treated as non-national. Moreover, the very act of suppression can provoke the opposite effect of intensifying community identity. So encouraging or at least allowing cultural diversity is good policy from both the practical and the principled point of view. Thank you. Sharing is caring. Comment your thoughts. Subscribe for more knowledge.